A lot of people I meet aren't very happy with their aquariums. They spend a lot of money on plants and equipment, but the tank simply doesn't look good. So, what should we really think about when designing a new tank? Let's find out. Here's one of my aquariums as an example. I didn't have an idea yet for what this tank should be, and even though the plants individually were incredibly beautiful, the arrangement didn't have much impact. I just finished creating a new layout in this aquarium. Stay subscribed if you want to see updates. For me, there's one really simple thing that's very important, and that is that an aquarium has to be built with real intention. That's not something very specific, just that the aquarium must have a reason for coming into existence, not just, as a collection of all the cool stuff. And this usually means that there's either a focal point, which has you build up to have so much visual appeal and interest, or could be imparting a feeling like calmness, chaos, or order. There should be a strong main idea or guiding principle that informs all of your choices, that explains how the viewer of the aquarium is supposed to react. Here are some different things to think about when coming up with your great idea. First, consider the design elements: shape, texture, size, and color. For each of these, think if you want repetition or variation. There's 2 options here, and you can even play around with both of these in the same layout. I don't have a specific recommendation, just make sure to be very deliberate about it. Here's the 5-gallon Betta tank. It's still growing in, but the intention is that the groups of plantings converge on a focal point from where this crypt undulata red, which is in there, but you can't really see it behind the taller Alternanthera renekii right now. But yeah, hopefully that will emerge and become the focal point. I tried to make the color palette really diverse, with the pinks of the Alternanthera and the red of Rotala atria, green of Myrophylla madagrosensei, all kind of coalescing together. The contrasts aren't so striking, however, in this low-tech system. Hopefully, though, it still makes some impact. Now, the textures in the tank are also interesting. Texture is shape, but on a local scale. And here, the lack of the kind of larger leaf shapes speaks to more appreciation for fine details. And it works well in this small tank with a lot of repetition to enhance the effect. Here are some different leaf shapes for plants that you can choose from. We saw an example of a tank that uses fine leaf shapes to build up texture. On the opposite side, you can also have a very interesting aquascape which uses larger leaf shapes. For example, in Walstad tanks like this one, where plants that benefit the most from the method happen to be those with large, broad leaves, like the classic Amazon sword. The Walstad tank method is basically a way to use a soil substrate to generate the best plant growth. This tank has vibrant, healthy plant growth and an awesome wow feeling, here with the aquascaper Diana Walstad for scale. Even though the primary reason for the tank isn't an aesthetic one, it ends up making quite an impact. Classic nature aquariums were pioneered by Takashi Amano and have a mixture of different sized plants and other hardscape materials which create a lot of interest. These are tanks that you can look at for hours. Here's a nice example created by Duc Viet Bui, and it has a monochrome color palette with this very, very strong green color. That gives a very striking effect. Monochrome green gives a feeling of great lushness. So you can see that very deliberate choices of either variation or similarity combine to produce one really strong feeling, the feeling of being immersed in nature. To take repetition to an extreme, there are some layouts which only use one plant. Hydrocodal tripartita is a popular choice for this due to its interesting texture. And Iwagumi setups, which we'll mention later, are typically dominated by one carpeting plant. I think having other interesting plants could work too, like for example, cryptocoryns or other interesting rosette plants. Bucephalandra is popular. So there's lots of different options here too. Japanese-style nature aquariums have a set of principles behind them, but I think the main one is asymmetry or randomness. This keeps things unpredictable and mimics the unplanned way natural things can grow. This is taken to the extreme in the jungle style, which is often done unintentionally from lack of maintenance. It's actually somewhat difficult to plan since it has to grow in, but you can think about what plants would look good in this kind of tank. It's focused on plants with medium-sized leaves that can compete for resources and fill out the tank. An important plant that satisfies these criteria, for example, is Hygrophila corymbosa. And to focus on color, red happens to be a color that is widely available in aquarium plants. Though to get the strongest colors, it takes some setting up, possibly with CO2 and fertilizers, or lack of them. The all-red aquarium has been tried before. You can find videos from Green Aqua or MJ Aquascaping where they try it. I find that this color palette strongly evokes the autumn season. There is also Brazilian-style aquascaping, which tends to use a lot of red plants, colorful, with high variation in texture. The Dutch style uses a palette with large variations and differentiation of adjacent plant clusters in terms of texture and in color. Besides purely abstract design, there are also nature elements for consideration. Of course, you can attempt a biotope, which recreates a natural habitat. This is restricted actually by the trade, with a relatively small number of species of aquarium plants specifically available. But you can use replacements of plants in the same family that might come from very different parts of the world. The Amazon is one of the most common settings for biotope aquariums, since many nice aquarium fish come from there. Southeast Asia also gives very rich material. Native biotopes circumvent some species restrictions, since plants and animals can be locally collected with appropriate permits, though this has its own challenges. Successful biotopes not only manage to collect the species appropriate to the habitat, but also evoke the strong sense of place for the chosen setting, and therefore they do have some aesthetic value. Inspiration from nature can come not just from faithful biotopes, but also by mimicking other kinds of natural landscapes or seascapes. The Iwagumi style, for example, mimics a mountain range or cliff formation. If you see one in person, you get a big impact from the dramatic scale that carpeting plants like Monte Carlo, Glossostigma, and H.C. Cuba have compared to the mountain forests, and that gives a very special feeling that's actually not easily captured on YouTube videos or in photographs. The last group of factors to consider for your big idea is maintenance and care. As we saw in some of the examples above, the natural growth of the plants is very important. Plants mostly fall into three categories. First, there's epiphytes, which are attached to hardscape directly, rooted onto the rock or wood, and they work together with that hardscape to create points of great beauty. For example, Lauren's tank here has Java fern rock that draws the eye. Second, there's stem plants, which can usually grow very tall and should be planted in small clusters. Separate the stems to give each room to grow. Rosette plants like cryptocoryns or Amazon sword can be good centerpieces, especially if the leaf shape is interesting. Besides aesthetic considerations, the intention to provide our animals with an ideal environment also provides ideas for aquascaping. We are restricted in our choices by the needs of the plants and animals, and that can guide design choices. For example, goldfish, cichlids, amphibians, and other aquarium creatures can disrupt plants, and therefore it can actually be interesting to design a tank for them. This axolotl tank uses pots and epiphytes so that the salamander won't uproot the plants. Now that we've talked about all these different elements, let's see how we can put them together to create an aquascaping idea. First, we want to talk about focal points. Focal points are often used because the eye can only focus on one place at a time. A focal point lets the eye rest there and draws the viewer into the aquascape. For biotope aquariums, the focal point should be something that really evokes that sense of place. But for other aquariums, how can we design a focal point? In container gardening, there's actually a notion of a really interesting phrase, thriller, filler, and spiller. A Thriller is the focal point. It uses height to draw the eye. It's a very tall plant. The filler adds mass, and the spiller provides an unrestrained nature feel, anchoring the pot to the surrounding environment. The three should coordinate using variations or repetitions in design elements. A variation in color or texture also creates a focal point. For example, this tank achieves a focal point with a clump of red Ludwigia in the center. Alternanthera reinekii on the left side is also red, and it might be better placed in the focal point near the center, but in the position where it's in, it actually does add some interest without being too distracting. Negative space is also used to create focal points, and this is increasingly popular in tanks that perform well in international aquascaping contests. Finally, you can use really interesting pieces of hardscape combined with epiphyte plants to create another kind of focal point. So when you're planning your next tank, remember to have a strong idea to guide you and really justify the work. If you see a tank you like, try to hold on to the feeling it gives you, and ask which elements we discussed contribute to that feeling. The best aquascapes can have an effortless feeling, but they're really made with true intention. Armed with that, you can bring your intellect and artistry to create an impactful little ecosystem for our precious creatures. Until next time, take care.